Pardo. We now return to the B Clinic. Shows John Belushi, Peter Aykroyd, Norm Macdonald, Chris Farley, David Arnold, Tom Davis, and Michael O'Donoghue dressed as bees, making buzzing sounds as they each pace around a hospital waiting room. Denitra Vance enters the waiting room dressed as a nurse bee and says, "Mr. B." Aykroyd, "Yes?" Vance, "Congratulations! The doctor was able to abort your queen's drone." Aykroyd, "It's a goner." The other bees pat Aykroyd on the back and cheer and congratulate him as he leaves. Vance leaves and the others begin to pace around the room again and making buzzing sounds. Jan Hooks enters the waiting room dressed as a nurse bee and says, "Mr. B." Arnold, "Yes?" Hooks, "Congratulations! Your drone was able to be aborted as well." Arnold, "So it's really gone?" Hooks, "That's right." The others pat Arnold on the back and congratulate him as he leaves. Hooks leaves. The others begin pacing the waiting room again, making buzzing sounds. Gilda Radner enters the waiting room dressed as a nurse bee. Radner, "Mr. B." Belushi, "Yeah?" Radner, "I'm sorry to say, Republicans took control of the state legislature about 20 minutes ago, just as we were going to abort your queen's egg. So unfortunately, we were unable to abort your worker. It's alive." Belushi, "It's alive?" Farley, McDonald, Davis, and O'Donoghue cautiously tap Belushi on the shoulder and all say, "It's alive." Belushi, I can't believe it. Is there anything we can do?" Radner, "You can try another state. Just be careful out there." Belushi, "Well, I guess we're moving then." Cuts to a montage of Belushi and Brittany Murphy quickly packing all of their belongings out of their honeycomb and driving the beat-up station wagon. Shows them unpack all of their things. Shows Belushi drive Murphy to the local bee clinic. Shows Belushi stop at a restaurant with a help wanted sign. Cuts to Phil Hartman and Penny Marshall sitting together at a restaurant table with a polka dot table cover. Marshall, "Darling, it's getting late. I better get back. Rob will be wondering where I am." Hartman, "Oh, Rob. It's always Rob. What about my feelings?" Marshall, "He's my husband." Hartman, "He's your husband in name only. You know it and I know it." Marshall, "Can't we discuss this like adults?" Hartman, "Oh, you mean like your parents who spent their entire married lives living as strangers?" Marshall, "You sound like my brother, Gary." Hartman, Gary. It's always Gary. What about my feelings?" Marshall, "Honey, you knew when this started it would never last. We both knew it." Hartman, "Oh, darling, marry me. Say yes." Marshall, "Oh, please don't torture me. You could never leave the kids. And Joyce would die." Hartman, Joyce. It's always Joyce. What about my feelings?" Shows John Belushi enter the restaurant dressed as a bee waiter, seating Peter Aykroyd and Jan Hooks as bees at another table. Marshall, "Besides, I could never leave Rob. Not now. Not since the accident." Antonio Vivaldi, dressed as a bee, approaches the table and begins to play the violin. Hartman, "He never knew you existed. And now that he's in a coma, he'll be even less interested." Marshall, "He needs me." Hartman, "He needs you? What about my feelings?" Marshall, "You're bitter." Hartman, "Well, sure I'm bitter. I have every right to be." Marshall, the man I fell in love with, the man I would have traded my husband in for, would have understood. Hartman, I'm sorry, I just can't help it. Marshall, maybe it was just meant to be. Maybe we're just two ships that passed in the night. Hartman, two ships that passed in the night? I feel like I'm in a B movie. Waiter, check please. Belushi approaches the table and tries to hand Hartman a check. Hartman gets up from the table and says, all right, that's it. Pull the music. This is ridiculous. Vivaldi stops playing. Hartman, here, really, I'm not going to go on with this thing. It's absolutely ridiculous. I was told when I came on the show that we weren't going to be spoofing SNL's B's, and here they are. This was my whole big dramatic chance to do something, and they stick a whole stage of recycled B's around me? Now, back in 1975, with the first SNL episode with George Carlin, the B's were used by SNL and they didn't work. And then the second episode with Paul Simon, they were used again and they were horrendous. How many times do I have to say it? I don't want the damn B's. Hartman turns towards Belushi and says, am I making myself clear? You're ruining the show. Please leave the stage. Marshall gets up from the table, stands by Hartman and says, now, Phil, you don't have to be so hard on the B's. They just recycled them from SNL because they thought it would help the show. Hartman, but they're not helping the show. They're ruining the show. Honey, I don't need recycled B's. I don't need them. I'm a major star. I voiced Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. Marshall, they're only B's. Belushi taps Hartman on the shoulder. Hartman turns around and says, what is it? McDonald, Aykroyd, O'Donoghue, Farley, Arnold, Davis, Hooks, Vance, Radner, and Vivaldi all stand behind Belushi. Belushi, I'm sorry if you think we're ruining the show, Mr. Hartman, but, see, you don't understand. We didn't ask to be B's. When you were on SNL, you had Jim Downey and a first-rate writing staff. All this show could come up with was recycling a 47-year-old bit. Do you think we like this? No, Mr. Hartman, but we don't have any choice. The other B's begin clapping. Hartman, well, I feel terrible. Belushi, and another thing. Let's say it's part B to my earlier point. And this one really stings. Dead from the earth, we're not alive. It's Saturday Not a Lie, starring John Belushi, Chris Farley, Phil Hartman, Jan Hooks, Norm MacDonald, Gilda Radner, Danitra Vance, and many other special deceased contributors. Musical guest, Antonio Vivaldi, and your host, Carl Reiner. Everybody, Carl Reiner. Applause, applause, applause. Reiner. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Now I'm going to regale you with stories from my wonderful life and career. John Belushi comes out dressed as a bee. Reiner, what are you doing here? Belushi, Sid Caesar sent me out. Told me to stick with the bee costume. He said it would suit you well. Reiner, buzz off, numbnuts. Belushi shrugs and leaves. Reiner, anyway, yes, I've worked with Sid Caesar on his shows, your show of shows. And the C's are out. Applause, applause, applause. Reiner. Hey, I have a lot to get to. Why don't you save your applause? Otherwise you're going to be gassed by the end. Anyway, also working on those shows was Mel Brooks. And the two of us ended up teaming up to create the iconic comedy albums 2,000 Years with Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. Reiner looks backstage and says, okay, where the hell is he? Where's Mel? In the audience, Phil Hartman stands up and says, Mel Brooks is still alive. Reiner, are you kidding me? That was going to be the rest of my monologue. For God's sake. George Burns comes out and says, did you mention something about my sake? Reiner, that's right. I directed the film Oh God, where George here portrayed God. Burns, wasn't too hard. I just played myself. Reiner, so how's the afterlife treating you, George? How are you doing with all the ladies? Burns, Carl, you ever tried to put an oyster in a slot machine? Reiner, that's George Burns for you, everybody. Applause, applause. Reiner, hey, do you not follow directions or something? I said hold your applause. As George Burns leaves, Reiner says, anyway, after the 2,000-year-old man, with Mel, I wrote a pilot with 13 episodes with me as the star. Didn't get picked up. And then later producers told me they wanted to make the show. And I told them, fellas, I don't want to fail with the same material twice. Sheldon Leonard comes out and says, and then I told you, you won't fail because we'll get a better actor to play you. Reiner. And that's how the Dick Van Dyke Show was born. Applaud. Reiner. Pipe down, I'm not finished. As Leonard leaves, Reiner says, and then we had to cast the other parts. I couldn't find a girl to play the wife. I saw 26 girls, couldn't find the right one. And I told Sheldon, and he said, you'll know when you find her. You'll know when you see her. And then this girl came in and Mary Tyler Moore comes out. Reiner. And then Mary Tyler Moore came out. Looking like Mary Tyler Moore. You know, beautiful girl, great chance. Moore. Thanks, Carl? Reiner. Come on now, you better applaud Mary's cans. Applause, applause, applause. As Moore leaves, Reiner says, and after the success of that show, I directed a few successful films as well, including The Jerk, with someone else with great cans, Steve Martin. No one comes out. Reiner, where the hell is Steve? In the audience, Hartman stands up and says, he's still alive. Reiner, are you kidding me? He's had white hair for over 50 years. Anyway, then I did the Oceans movies. I'm guessing those fellas are still alive too. Bernie Mac comes out. Reiner, okay, well, I guess the black guy from the films didn't make it out either. Go figure. Anyway, we have a great show tonight. Antonio Vivaldi is here, so stick around, because in all 4 seasons, Gloria is Magnificat. We'll be right back.